But we're going to start with apologies to Joel Embiid. I will wax poetic about you later because of scheduling issues. We're going to start with the Miami Heat in a deal I have alluded to on this podcast several times, trading Kyle Lowry and a lottery-protected 2027 first-round pick, which becomes unprotected in 2028 if it does not convey in the previous year, for Terry Rozier, who is quietly averaging 23 points a game for aforementioned stinky Charlotte Hornets, and has 3 years remaining on his contract at 23, 25, and 26 million. The last one is mostly guaranteed. We'll just call it 26. Kyle Lowry is on an expiring $29.6 million contract. Really a disappointing end to what looked like a promising match between Kyle Lowry and the Heat. He is 5 of 30 in Miami's last 5 games. That's his shooting percentage. He has not scored more than 3 baskets, made more than 3 baskets in a game since January 3rd. He was benched over the weekend. The Heat starting a point guardless lineup with Kyle Lowry coming off the bench. And I think that did not go over super well. And the writing was on the wall for this trade once that happened. And the timing, therefore, is not a surprise. In Terry Rozier, I mentioned last week that I think this was a place he wanted to go. I think he has no illusions about being the third and sometimes fourth offensive option on the team. I think he understands my days of shooting whenever the hell I want are over. And I think that's promising for Miami because he can score. He is only shooting 30% on catch and shoot threes this year, 34% last year. But if you look at the 3 years before that, 39%, 43%, 46%. He has been, with the exception of 1 season, 2 seasons ago, a very consistent crunch time bucket getter for a bad team under incredible duress because the team has been so bad. And I think, look, the Heat have some questions here in terms of playmaking. Terry Rozier is kind of probably a below average playmaker for a quote unquote point guard or even a hybrid guard. But Kyle Lowry's kind of pass and cut and transition playmaking had just kind of run its course. The weaknesses had begun to outweigh the strengths. And in Terry Rozier, they get a guy who is only 6'1", but he has a 6'8" wingspan. He can guard up in size. He's a two-way player. And I think that kind of a guy who can shoot threes and guard twos and ones kind of fortifies the Heat and prevents them from having to lean too much, if at all, on lineups with both Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson in the lineup, 2 kind of weak spots defensively. Both have been fantastic offensively this year. I like this trade for Miami. I like it a lot for Charlotte. I think it's about as good as they were going to get. One okay to good whatever first for Terry Rozier. And it's a signal that Rick Schnall and Gabe Plotkin and the new owners, by the way, Gabe Plotkin, a key character in the movie Dumb Money, which I just saw on a flight back from Los Angeles last week. Not a great portrayal, not a flattering portrayal for Gabe Plotkin. Did not know that he was on the one end of the GameStop shenanigans from years ago, but a signal that they have the right approach to the team, tear it to the studs, build around the young guys. More trades are going to come. Bobby Marks, I want to start here. I want you to clarify a couple of things in the bookkeeping.
Sure. Yeah.
No one is better at this than you. The Heat already owe Oklahoma City a 2025 lottery protected first rounder that becomes unprotected in 26. This is a 2027 1-14 unprotected 2028. So 2 years exactly later and exactly mirrors the terms of it. How many picks can Miami trade now ahead of the trade deadline, and how many will they be able to trade after the draft this year? And I asked that because this was a moment where the Heat had to choose, maybe had to choose, maybe not, between do we keep all our remaining draft pick equity dry, powder dry, for whoever is the next star that says, I want to go to Miami. And we just saw that doesn't always work out, because the Damian Lillard thing didn't work out. Maybe it has worked out for Miami, but the star didn't get there. It's worked out fine for Miami, honestly, I think. Or do we expend some of the draft capital for an upgrade this year that gives this team that made the finals last year and has made 3 of the last 4 conference finals a better chance to compete with the big dogs in the East? So where are they draft equity wise for trades now and in the summer?
I think it's going to be interesting how the trade memo is going to be spelled out here, because as you said, they owe Oklahoma City a first in 25. It's got it's protected, unprotected in 26. How the rules are, you can't trade in back-to-back years, right? It's got to stagnate here. Now, if has Woj had broken that it's a 27 first that's protected lottery that goes unprotected in 28. Usually how it goes or makes sense is that if the pick is not conveyed in 2025, then Miami would get Miami would send out a 28 lottery protected first that becomes unprotected in 29, and that changes things. Okay, why that changes?
You're right. What you're saying in plain English is that if you look at the mechanics of both of these picks, there is a scenario where they would technically owe a 26 and a 27, which is not allowed.
Correct. Exactly. And that changes the dynamics, because if the pick carries out to 29, then for right now, for this current year up until February, the trade deadline, there's no picks available to be traded. Okay? Because if you owe, as far as how the protection works. If that changes and it says, which I don't believe so, and we'll get some clarification when we get this memo. If that says, well, it's 2 years after the pick is conveyed and it just turns into an unprotected, which I don't believe Miami would leave themselves exposed from that perspective, then 2030 becomes available, okay, to trade at this deadline. Let's roll to the summer. Okay,
which is more interesting because
because I don't see them putting something else in play unless something really.
And I don't see a player that's worth it for them. And, Donovan Mitchell has been the hot name. And as I'm going to talk about later, Cavs are just winning every single game. And there is no Donovan Mitchell trade going on right now. So continue, please.
So let's go to the night of the draft, right? And why that matters is that Miami has their own 2024 first that they can trade the rights to. Okay, the rights to that player. They strike a deal. And then all of a sudden, they will have their 2031 first available here because of the 7-year rule. We look ahead, right? We don't look back. So now we'll have 2 picks in play, starting the night of the draft.
Well, that's not enough to outbid any number of teams for disgruntled star X that becomes available, which is why we just saw another team that can't outbid the Thunder, the Rockets, the Pelicans, and on, the Nets even, for said player, put their chips in the Indiana Pacers for a player who is a very good player, but not a kind of blow up Twitter, totally change the landscape of the NBA player, and Pascal Siakam. And look, maybe it doesn't matter for a couple of reasons. Number one, the Heat play at a different game than 80% of the league. The Heat play the game of star players point to us, whether it's Jimmy Butler or Damian Lillard, and say, we want to go there. And it happens in Jimmy Butler's case at a price that you look back on, you're like, how did they get Jimmy Butler for just that? Or in the case of Damian Lillard, the Blazers decide to say, nope, sorry, we're not granting your wish. So they play in different waters. Or conversely, it may not matter, because I was talking to a front office executive from another team yesterday who said to me, the Heat should just trade for somebody now on a minor deal because they don't have enough to get a superstar anyway. Like, we already saw with the Lillard thing that Tyler Hero does not have super duper league wide appeal, even though he's having quite a nice offensive year when he's been healthy. They already are out this one pick. Like, they're not going to be able to compete at that level for those kind of players anyway, unless they're willing to put Jaquez in a deal. And Jaquez has frankly been so good and looks like such a central casting perfect championship role player that I don't think the Heat want to do that unless it's for like one of the 10 best players in the league or something like that. So I think this kind of upgrade, even if it chips away at that superstar trade ability, is totally fine given all those circumstances. And I think Terry Rozier is pretty good. Like, I like his fit with this team. He's annoyingly perfect for hashtag Heat culture. And I think you'll buy in right away. And the Lowry thing had just run its course. And you look at this team, I'm going to assume their starting 5 is now Rozier. So another ball handler, scorer for a team that's 20th in offense and needs it. Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, who kind of like statistically, it looks like a good Jimmy Butler season, not a great one, but there's been a couple of games, including the last one against Orlando, where it was like, did Jimmy Butler play in the game? Like, where's
10,
Jimmy
10
Butler?
10 field goal attempts, I believe that game was.
And like half of them were threes.
Yeah.
Um, Jaquez and Bam. It's a nice starting five. Coming off the bench, I got Jay Rich, Duncan Robinson, Caleb Martin, Kevin Love, and I can either stagger some minutes or play Haywood Highsmith as my 10th guy. That's a good deep team. And look, I've said it before, like they may be 6th in the East right now or wherever they are. They have beaten Milwaukee twice in the playoffs recently. They have no fear of Philadelphia, despite what Embiid is just laying waste to the league. And they have gone toe to toe with Boston and beaten them twice in the last 4 years in the playoffs, including last season. Like, this is a team that's a wake us up in the playoffs team. We feel we can go toe to toe with anyone. And I think this makes them better. I don't think there's any question this makes them better this season. It makes their ceiling higher.
It's a wake me up team when we get to the playoffs because of the deal. I don't think you can make that argument if they stayed pat just based on how they've played. And I know there's always the argument like, well, Miami will always figure it out. But man, you look at their last stretch of games here. Certainly they could have lost in Brooklyn a week ago. You get blown out by Orlando, Toronto, and lose at the buzzer to Atlanta on a Murray 3. And you know, we always get to this point where like teams are like, oh, we're gonna wait to the deadline to do a deal, but you basically gave yourself a 2.5 week, kind of runway to, figure things out here as far as with this roster. And you listen to, Eric Spoelstra, it's like, this isn't good enough, like how this team has played. And I look at it for like, I'm looking at this like big picture too. I'm looking at it and there's always a finance, and I think we always have to talk about the financial arm of this here. I'm looking at it from Miami took back less money in the deal, right? About $6.5 million less. They go under the second apron. And why that matters, right? It doesn't matter as much now. Why that matters was because starting in the offseason, Miami was a second apron team. Miami was not allowed to send out cash in a trade. Miami was not allowed to go out and aggregate contracts in a trade. All these restrictions now begin to lift as far as if Miami stays pat. So if there's that big whale that comes available, they can maybe go out and do something, or maybe combine money here. Now, the challenge now becomes, and this is for them to figure out when we get to the offseason in July. Now you start to dance with that second apron, right? You've got to figure out what happens with Caleb Martin, who's got a player option here. You've got 184 million in salaries. The apron's 190.
How much money they have in salary?
You have 184 in salary going on for next year. The apron is at 190, and that includes Caleb Martin's player option.
I was gonna say I had them 177.
Yeah,
without Caleb Martin's player option, which is a little more than 7 million, and
yep.
He should turn that down because he will get significantly more than that on the open market.
Yeah, so the cost might be that you might lose him to retain to do the Terry Rozier trade here. So there's that, like, do we stand pat and wait into the offseason? But I think listen, if this team was 33-10 and Lowry was playing a prominent role, I don't know if they're as aggressive here, but I think there's a short-term implication. I think there's a long-term implication as far as why they went out and did this deal.
Yeah, I think it just unquestionably makes them better. And if I'm one of the three best teams in the East, or New York, or Cleveland, or Indiana, and now I think if you look at the East now, we may start to see, depending on how Orlando plays, we already had seen a gap between 8 and 9. We may see with Siakam going to Indiana, Rozier going to Miami, Anunoby going to New York, and I don't think the Knicks are done. Cleveland being 11 games over, chasing the 3rd seed, by the way, which really matters if I said last week on NBA Today, like, we could wake up and the Knicks could be in the conference finals, and that got some traction on social media and stuff. What I should have elaborated on is like, that doesn't seem very likely the more I thought about it, because the Celtics are the number 1 seed, and I think the Celtics are are at least ahead above Milwaukee and Philly. So getting to the conference finals from 4-5 means going through Boston in the second round, which is a tougher road to hoe. But we could see like a gap open up between 7 and 8, which would create a really fun race for the 6th seed, which is one of the things that the play-in was designed to do, was to make that 6th seed a target. And you look at the top 6 in the East now, Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, Cleveland, Knicks, Heat, Pacers are the top 7 in that order. Heat and Pacers are tied. That could be a really fun race if Orlando kind of slides a little bit, and they've been dealing with a ton of injuries. Franz Wagner just came back, and no one is happier about that than Paolo Banchero, who's had to do goddamn near everything for them for 2 weeks now. That could be a fun race, but I do think the Heat are unquestionably better. And if I'm one of those teams above them, I'm like, oh God, these MFers again, like they're going to come at us with these guys. And I mentioned the playmaking quotient, and Kyle Lowry's sort of contribution to that had waned. As I'm thinking off the top of my head, Tyler Hero is probably not going to want to hear this, but my thing with Tyler Hero has always been, and he's had a great year this year, I want him to be like 15% more Klay Thompson-y and 15% less I got to dance with the ball and do all this stuff, because you can engineer playmaking without great passing if you have one great shooter who's willing to just fly around the floor and draw two and play that Duncan Robinson Bam 2-man game. We saw it with Strus last year, for instance. And I would like to see him with another ball handler now, and the Heat push him to, hey, can you be a little, I know you want to make an all-star team. It's not going to happen this year. You consider yourself a star and you're averaging 23 a game. Can you lean a little bit more in that direction just to give us a little like side to side juice, give us some life on offense? I think I don't have too much. I think from Charlotte's perspective, with 3 years and 75 million or whatever left on Terry Rozier, is a good but not great player. This is about what they were going to get. I don't have a lot of strong Charlotte thoughts. Do you? They're going to obviously try to reroute Lowry and trade Hayward and trade whoever else that they can trade, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's the goal, and that's why you're doing this 2.5 weeks before February 8th, is try to reroute him. Listen, they've got $86 million in salary next year. The cap is 142. Okay, so you can say, oh, Charlotte's going to be a player. Well, no. What you want to be is a team that's taking back salary and kind of building up your draft equity, because Charlotte has not been known for a team that, they're not Oklahoma City, or they're not even the Wizards, who have slowly kind of added second round picks, really not first. They're not Utah. All these teams have kind of just added first round picks. They owe a first to San Antonio. That's certainly protected in the next 2 years and likely won't get conveyed. But if you're Charlotte, now I'm turning to like, okay, who's next? Okay. Is it Miles Bridges? Is it Gordon Hayward's got a hurt $31.5 million, but who, for me, it's nobody's except for Brandon Miller, who played really well in the win against Minnesota Monday night, was terrific down the stretch. And LaMelo is off those two guys are off the board. But it's open business here. And in the trade guide I wrote about was the people to watch were their owners, right? Like their ownership group were the people to watch, just because this is their first go at it. How much say did Mitch Kupchak, their GM, have? Certainly he does. In this deal where you're taking back an expiring and a first round pick here. But I think Charlotte's open for business as far as continually to move off some of these contracts.
I think this is a signal that this is going to be a complete renovation of the Charlotte Hornets to the studs almost by this new ownership group. And I think everybody, I've heard Gordon Hayward is slated to come back soon-ish, and that there is some interest in him around the league. His number is just really, really big. Yeah. Salary-wise, it's 30 million, I think, 30-something million. That's hard to trade. Kyle Lowry it's gonna be a struggle to find someone to take him at $30 million a year and send you out equal money. So we'll see. The buyout market, eagerly awaits guys like this. I've said before, and maybe this new ownership sees it, and it's bad for the rest of the league, who are sitting there like vultures trying to see if the Hornets are a team they can fleece. The guy I would be trying to get out of there, and I realize he's poison pilled to whatever degree that matters, is PJ Washington. If I were a good
team, PJ's not poison pilled.
He's not.
No, because he just signed a regular contract, right? Standard contract.
Oh, okay.
So
someone on another team told me he was poison pilled. That's
just
good.
Just the rookies. So yeah, that's a great number. 15 and change, right around there. That's another one. I've said all along, like, the guys, these guys with these non-max and in that 20 range below, even below, like they got so much value out there because they're the fourth or fifth guy on a team.